Have you ever walked into a room and immediately knew something was terribly, horribly wrong? Ryan Mitchell stood frozen in the doorway of his stepdaughter's bedroom, his heart pounding so violently he could hear it echoing in his ears. The metal latch he'd just pulled back from the outside of the door hung loose in his trembling fingers. His 6-year-old stepdaughter, Emma, lay curled on the bare floor in the corner, shaking uncontrollably, her lips cracked and bleeding, her tiny hands clutching her stomach as silent tears streamed down her flushed cheeks. "Daddy," she whispered, the word barely audible, "it hurts so much. Please make it stop." Ryan dropped to his knees, his expensive suit jacket scraping against the dirty floor as he reached for her burning body. Her skin felt like fire beneath his palms. But what froze the blood in his veins wasn't just the fever. It was the look in her eyes, a look of pure, absolute terror that no child should ever have to experience. "Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. Let me take you back to where this nightmare truly began, 3 days earlier, when Ryan Mitchell thought his biggest problem was a delayed flight from Singapore. Ryan Mitchell had built his fortune from nothing. At 38 years old, he owned a chain of luxury hotels across the East Coast, each property bearing his signature touch of elegance mixed with warmth. His success story was the kind magazines loved to feature. Orphan boy makes good, builds empire, finds love again after tragedy. But behind the polished exterior and the confident smile he wore in boardrooms, Ryan carried a weight that never fully lifted. 3 years ago, his first wife, Catherine, had died from complications during what should have been a routine surgery. She left him with a promise whispered in her final moments: "Take care of yourself, Ryan. Find happiness again. Don't let our daughter grow up watching you fade away." For 2 years, Ryan had focused solely on work and raising his daughter, Emily, who was now 9 years old. Then he met Jessica at a charity gala in Manhattan. She was 29, vibrant, artistic, and seemed to genuinely care about Emily. After a whirlwind romance of 8 months, they married in a small ceremony in the Hamptons. Jessica moved into his townhouse in Brooklyn Heights, but she insisted on keeping her own space as well, a modern apartment in Soho where she could paint and have her creative freedom. Ryan, desperate to make the marriage work and believing that giving Jessica her independence would strengthen their bond, agreed. He even paid for the entire apartment outright, a $1.2 million gift that Jessica accepted with tears of gratitude and promises of eternal devotion. The arrangement seemed perfect at first. When Ryan traveled for business, which he did frequently, Emily would spend weekdays with her grandmother, Patricia, and weekends alternating between Ryan and Jessica. Emma, Jessica's daughter from a previous relationship, would join them during those weekends, and the blended family appeared to function smoothly. Emma was a quiet, gentle child, just 6 years old, with wide brown eyes and a shy smile that reminded Ryan of his late wife. But something had shifted in recent months. Ryan couldn't quite put his finger on it, but Emily had become increasingly reluctant to spend time at Jessica's apartment. She never complained directly, but Ryan noticed how she would grow quiet when Jessica's name came up, how she would find excuses to stay at her grandmother's instead. "Dad, can't I just stay with Grandma this weekend?" Emily had asked just before his latest trip to Singapore, her voice carrying an edge of desperation that made him pause. "Sweetheart, Jessica is looking forward to seeing you. She mentioned planning something special," Ryan had replied, checking his watch as his car waited outside to take him to the airport. Emily's face had fallen, but she nodded obediently. "Okay, Dad. Is everything all right?" Ryan had knelt down to her level, searching her face. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" "I know," Emily said quickly, too quickly. "Everything's fine. Have a safe trip." That conversation haunted Ryan throughout his 5 days in Singapore. Between meetings with investors and property inspections, he found himself checking his phone obsessively, calling Jessica to ask about the girls. Each time, Jessica answered with her usual cheerful tone, assuring him that both girls were perfectly happy, that they were having wonderful bonding time together. "Emily and Emma are watching a movie right now," Jessica had said during his last call just the night before. "They're completely absorbed in it. Do you want me to get them?" No, don't interrupt their fun," Ryan had replied, reassured by the sound of children's laughter he could hear faintly in the background. "Just tell them I love them and I'll be home soon." "Will do, sweetheart. We miss you." The business in Singapore concluded faster than expected, allowing Ryan to catch an earlier flight home. He landed at JFK at 6 in the morning on Friday, 2 full days ahead of schedule. Rather than heading straight to his townhouse, Ryan decided to surprise the girls at Jessica's apartment. He stopped at a toy store that had just opened and picked up a beautiful porcelain doll dressed in traditional English clothing for Emma, who had mentioned wanting one months ago, and the latest book in Emily's favorite series. Excitement bubbled in Ryan's chest as he drove through the morning traffic toward Soho. The city was just waking up, street vendors setting up their carts, joggers making their way through the parks. It was the kind of crisp autumn morning that made New York feel magical, full of possibility. He parked his car in the underground garage of Jessica's building and took the elevator to the 12th floor. The hallway was quiet, the thick carpeting muffling his footsteps as he approached apartment 12C. Ryan knocked first, a courtesy, but received no answer. He checked his phone, no messages. He tried calling Jessica, but the phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. Probably still sleeping, Ryan thought, glancing at his watch. It was only 7:30. He retrieved the spare key Jessica had given him for emergencies from his wallet and unlocked the door. The moment the door swung open, Ryan's smile vanished. A wall of cold air hit him first. The apartment's air conditioning was running at full blast despite the pleasant temperature outside, making the interior feel like a walk-in freezer. But it was the smell that made his stomach turn. It wasn't the usual scent of Jessica's lavender candles or her expensive perfume. Instead, a thick, sour odor hung in the air, a mixture of stale alcohol, cigarette smoke, and something else Ryan couldn't quite identify but that made his instincts scream that something was very wrong. "Jessica?" Ryan called out, his voice echoing in the silence. No response. He stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind him, and made his way toward the living room. What he saw there made him stop dead in his tracks. The pristine, carefully decorated space that Jessica had spent months perfecting looked like the aftermath of a wild party. Empty wine bottles, at least a dozen of them, were scattered across the coffee table and floor. Crystal glasses with dried red wine stains sat on every surface. Throw pillows that usually rested neatly on the cream-colored sofa were strewn across the room. An ashtray overflowed with cigarette butts, the source of the acrid smoke smell. Pizza boxes, Chinese takeout containers, and candy wrappers littered the expensive hardwood floors. And there, sprawled face down on the sofa, was Jessica. Her blonde hair was tangled and matted, spreading across her face like a veil. She wore a slinky black dress that had ridden up to her thighs, and one of her high heels lay on the floor while the other remained on her foot. Her breathing was heavy and labored, each exhale carrying the unmistakable scent of alcohol. Ryan stood there for a long moment, his mind struggling to process the scene. This wasn't the first time he'd seen evidence of Jessica enjoying her freedom a bit too much. There had been other occasions when he'd returned home to find her hungover, laughing it off as a girl's night out that got a little out of hand. He had chosen to overlook it, believing that everyone deserved to unwind, that his wife was entitled to her social life. But this was different. This wasn't just a hangover. This was complete abandon, total negligence. And as his eyes scanned the disaster around him, one thought pierced through his shock like an ice pick through his heart. Where were the girls? "Emily!" Ryan called out, his voice sharp with sudden panic. "Emma! Girls, where are you?" No answer came. The apartment remained eerily silent except for Jessica's snoring. Ryan moved quickly through the space, checking the kitchen first. More evidence of the party greeted him. More bottles, more trash, unwashed dishes piled in the sink, food left out on the counter that had begun to rot. His heart hammering now, Ryan rushed down the hallway toward the bedrooms. The master bedroom door stood open, revealing an unmade bed and more chaos. But it was the second bedroom, the one designated as the girls' room, that made Ryan's blood run cold. A shiny metal safety latch, the kind meant for closets or storage rooms, was secured on the outside of the door. The kind that could only be opened from the hallway, effectively trapping anyone inside. Ryan's hands shook as he reached for the latch. "Emily, Emma, are you in there?" A sound came from beyond the door, faint, so faint Ryan almost missed it. A whimper, weak and frightened. With fumbling fingers, Ryan yanked the latch free and threw open the door. Darkness flooded out. The blackout curtains Jessica had installed were drawn completely shut, blocking every bit of natural light. The air that escaped from the room was thick, stale, and carried a smell that made Ryan's eyes water, the unmistakable odor of a sick child, of uncleaned accidents, of neglect so profound it felt like a physical blow. Ryan's hand shot out, frantically feeling along the wall until he found the light switch. He flipped it up. The overhead light flickered on, dim and yellow, casting shadows across a scene that would haunt Ryan Mitchell for the rest of his life. Emily and Emma were not in their beds. Both girls were huddled together on the floor in the far corner of the room, as far from the door as they could get. Emma was in front, curled into a tight ball, her small body trembling violently. Her face was flushed a dangerous shade of red, sweat plastering her hair to her forehead despite the cold temperature of the apartment. Behind her, Emily sat with her back against the wall, her arms wrapped protectively around Emma's shoulders, her face pale and streaked with dried tears. But it was Emma's condition that sent Ryan into immediate action. The little girl's eyes were barely open, glazed and unfocused. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her breathing rapid and shallow. Her hands clutched her stomach, and as Ryan watched, her whole body spasmed with pain. "Oh my God," Ryan breathed, dropping the gifts he'd been carrying. They hit the floor with a crash that neither girl seemed to notice. He rushed forward, his knees hitting the hardwood floor hard enough to bruise, but he felt nothing except terror. "Emily, sweetheart, what happened?" Ryan asked, even as his hands reached for Emma, checking her pulse, feeling the frightening heat radiating from her tiny body. "Dad." Emily's voice cracked and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Dad, I tried to help her. I tried so hard, but the door was locked. I couldn't get out. I couldn't get help." "Sure, it's okay, baby. I'm here now," Ryan said, though his voice shook. He turned his attention to Emma, gently pulling her into his arms. She was so light, too light and burning with fever. "Emma, sweetie, can you hear me? It's Ryan. You're safe now." Emma's eyes fluttered, struggling to focus on his face. Her mouth moved, trying to form words, but only a weak sound came out. Then her hand moved from her stomach to point weakly at a plastic bucket in the corner of the room. Ryan's gaze followed her finger, and his stomach dropped. The bucket was half full of vomit. From the smell and the state of it, Emma had been throwing up for hours, possibly days. Near the bucket were 2 empty water bottles and a handful of crackers scattered on the floor, the only provisions that had apparently been left for 2 children who had been locked in this room. "How long?" Ryan asked Emily, his voice barely above a whisper. "How long have you been locked in here?" Emily's face crumpled. "Since Tuesday night. Jessica, she said she was going to have some friends over and that we needed to stay in our room and be quiet. She brought us the crackers and water and said she'd check on us in the morning. But she never came back, Dad. She never came back." Ryan felt something break inside his chest. Tuesday night. It was now Friday morning. These 2 little girls had been trapped in this room for nearly 3 full days, with no food beyond some crackers, minimal water, and no way to get help when Emma became sick. "Emma started throwing up Wednesday morning," Emily continued, her words tumbling out in a rush now that her father was here, now that she could finally tell someone what had happened. "She said her stomach hurt really bad. I tried to help her. I gave her the water, but she kept throwing up. I banged on the door, Dad. I banged and screamed for Jessica to come help, but she never came. I could hear music playing in the living room, people laughing, but nobody came." Ryan pulled Emily into his arms along with Emma, holding both girls as his mind raced. Emma needed a hospital immediately. Her symptoms, the fever, the abdominal pain, the vomiting, could indicate anything from food poisoning to appendicitis to something even worse. And 3 days without proper hydration for a 6-year-old child could lead to dangerous dehydration, especially if she'd been vomiting the entire time. "Daddy," Emma whispered against his chest, the first word she'd managed to speak. "It hurts so much. Make it stop. Please make it stop." "I will, baby. I promise," Ryan said, his voice fierce. He shifted Emma carefully in his arms and stood up, his daughter's small body feeling impossibly fragile. "Emily, come with me right now. We're leaving." As Ryan carried Emma out of the nightmare bedroom, Emily scrambling to her feet to follow, the little girl spoke again, her voice so quiet Ryan almost didn't hear it. "She was playing a game, Daddy. Jessica said we were playing a game called Invisible Children. She said invisible children have to be very, very quiet and stay hidden. She said if we were good at being invisible, she'd give us a prize." Ryan's jaw clenched so hard his teeth hurt. He didn't trust himself to speak. Instead, he moved quickly through the apartment, Emily following close behind, her hand gripping the back of his jacket. As they passed the living room, Jessica stirred on the couch, rolling over and mumbling something incoherent before settling back into her alcohol-induced sleep. Ryan didn't even glance at her. If he stopped to confront her now, he didn't know what he might do, and his daughters needed him focused. They needed him to be their protector, their father, not a man consumed by rage. He grabbed his phone from his pocket with his free hand as he stepped into the hallway, pulling the apartment door shut behind them with his foot. His fingers shook as he dialed 911, holding Emma close while Emily pressed against his side. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's calm voice came through the line. I need an ambulance immediately, Ryan said, his voice strained but clear. My daughter is 6 years old, she's burning with fever, severe abdominal pain, and she's been vomiting for approximately 3 days with minimal food or water. She's lethargic and showing signs of severe dehydration. We're at 347 West Broadway, Soho, 12th floor. Please hurry. An ambulance is being dispatched now, sir, the operator replied. Can you tell me more about her symptoms? As Ryan answered the operator's questions, providing Emma's medical history and describing her current condition in detail, he felt Emily's hand tighten on his jacket. He looked down at his daughter and saw something in her eyes that made his heart ache, a mixture of relief and guilt, as though she believed she should have somehow been able to protect Emma better, should have found a way to get help sooner. Emily, listen to me, Ryan said softly, shifting the phone slightly away from his mouth. None of this is your fault. Do you understand me? You did everything right. You took care of Emma. You're the bravest girl I know. Emily nodded, but tears continued to stream down her face. I was so scared, Dad. I thought Emma might die. Like Mom did. The words hit Ryan like a physical blow. He pulled Emily closer with his free arm, holding both his daughters as tightly as he dared while still being careful of Emma's condition. Emma is going to be fine, he said with a conviction he forced himself to feel. The doctors are going to take care of her. She's going to be okay. The elevator seemed to take forever to arrive. When it finally did, Ryan stepped inside and pressed the button for the ground floor, watching the numbers light up as they descended. Emily leaned against him, her small body shaking with silent sobs. Emma remained limp in his arms, her breathing too fast, her skin too hot. By the time they reached the lobby, Ryan could already hear sirens approaching. The doorman, an elderly man named George who had always greeted Ryan with a friendly smile, took one look at the scene and rushed to hold the door open, his face pale with concern. Mr. Mitchell, what happened? George asked, but Ryan was already moving past him toward the street where an ambulance was pulling up, its lights flashing red and blue against the morning sun. 2 paramedics jumped out, a man and a woman, both moving with practiced efficiency. The woman went straight to Emma, gently taking her from Ryan's arms while firing questions at him. The male paramedic guided them all toward the back of the ambulance, helping Emily climb inside while his partner began examining Emma. Pulse is rapid and weak, the female paramedic, whose name tag read Santos, announced. Skin is hot and dry, signs of severe dehydration. We need to get an endorse started immediately. Ryan watched, feeling utterly helpless as they worked on Emma, starting in 4-line, taking her temperature, checking her blood pressure. The numbers they called out meant nothing to him, but he could read their concern in the speed of their movements, the sharp tone of their voices as they communicated with each other. Sir, we need to transport her to the hospital right away, Santos said, looking up at Ryan. Mount Sinai is the closest. Are you riding with us? Yes, Ryan said immediately. Then he looked at Emily, torn. He couldn't leave his daughter alone, but he also couldn't let Emma go to the hospital without him. As if reading his mind, George stepped forward. Mr. Mitchell, I can call your mother-in-law, Patricia, right? I have her number from the building directory. I can have her meet you at the hospital. I'll stay with Emily until she arrives. Ryan looked at George, at this man who barely knew him but was offering help without hesitation. Thank you, he managed to say. Yes, please call Patricia. Tell her to come to Mount Sinai immediately. I'm coming with you, Dad, Emily said firmly, her voice stronger than Ryan had heard it all morning. Emma needs both of us. Ryan nodded, unable to argue with the determination in his daughter's eyes. They climbed into the ambulance together, sitting on the bench opposite where Emma lay on the stretcher, now hooked up to an endorse and a blood pressure monitor. The doors slammed shut, and the ambulance lurched forward, sirens wailing as they sped through the streets of Manhattan. Santos continued to work on Emma, adjusting her endorse, placing an oxygen mask over her small face, monitoring her vital signs with practiced focus. Sweetheart, you're going to be okay, she said softly to Emma. We're taking good care of you. Just hang in there for us. Emma's eyes remained closed, but her hand moved slightly, fingers reaching out. Ryan immediately took her hand in his, squeezing gently. I'm right here, Emma. You're safe now. Nobody is going to hurt you ever again. The drive to Mount Sinai felt eternal and instantaneous all at once. Ryan kept his eyes fixed on Emma's face, watching for any change, any sign that she was getting worse. Emily sat pressed against his side, also staring at Emma, her hand resting on Emma's leg in a gesture of comfort and solidarity. When they finally arrived at the emergency entrance, everything became a blur of movement. The ambulance doors flew open, and Emma was whisked away on the stretcher, Santos rattling off medical information to the ER team that had rushed out to meet them. Ryan and Emily followed, half running to keep up as they made their way through automatic doors into the harsh fluorescent lighting of the emergency department. "Sir, we need you to stop here," a nurse said, putting a gentle but firm hand on Ryan's arm. "We need to examine her and get her stabilized. The doctors will come talk to you as soon as they can." "But she needs me," Ryan protested, watching as Emma disappeared through another set of doors, surrounded by medical personnel in scrubs. "The best thing you can do for her right now is let us do our jobs," the nurse said kindly. "There's a family waiting room just down this hall. I promise someone will update you as soon as possible. In the meantime, I need you to go to registration and provide Emma's medical information." Ryan wanted to argue, wanted to demand that he be allowed to stay with Emma, but he knew the nurse was right. He nodded numbly and let her guide him and Emily toward the waiting room. As they walked, he pulled out his phone and saw 3 missed calls from Patricia and 1 text message. "George called me. On my way." "Hold on, Ryan." The waiting room was nearly empty, just a few other people scattered across the plastic chairs, each lost in their own private worries. Ryan and Emily sank into seats near the window, and for the first time since walking into Jessica's apartment, Ryan allowed himself to fully feel the weight of what had happened. His hands were shaking. His vision blurred with tears. He hadn't let himself cry while he needed to be strong for the girls. Emily reached over and took his hand, and the roles reversed in that moment. His 9-year-old daughter became the one offering comfort, squeezing his fingers the way he'd squeezed hers thousands of times before. They sat like that in silence, waiting, hoping, praying that Emma would be okay, that the damage done by 3 days of neglect hadn't gone too far to fix. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness, each one feeling like an hour. Ryan kept checking his phone, kept looking toward the doors where Emma had vanished, kept trying to convince himself that everything would be all right. But deep in his heart, he knew that even if Emma's body healed, what had happened in that apartment would leave scars that might never fully fade. For any of them. Ryan Mitchell sat in the sterile waiting room of Mount Sinai Hospital, his body present but his mind trapped in an endless loop of horror and disbelief, replaying the image of Emma curled on that floor, burning with fever, abandoned and suffering while her mother lay passed out in an alcohol-induced stupor just rooms away. Emily had fallen asleep against his shoulder 20 minutes ago, exhausted from 3 days of terror and the emotional release of finally being safe, her small chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of sleep that only children could achieve even in the midst of crisis. Ryan couldn't sleep, couldn't even close his eyes without seeing that locked bedroom door, without hearing Emily's voice telling him about the game Jessica had made them play, the game of being invisible children. His hands clenched into fists on his lap as rage bubbled up inside him, a burning, consuming fury that he had to consciously push down because giving into it now wouldn't help Emma, wouldn't change what had happened, wouldn't undo 3 days of neglect and cruelty. The automatic doors to the waiting room swished open and Patricia rushed in, his former mother-in-law, Catherine's mother, a woman of 63 with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that could see through any pretense or lie. She spotted Ryan immediately and hurried over, her face pale with worry and her hands trembling as she reached out to touch Emily's sleeping form, checking that her granddaughter was all right before turning her attention to Ryan. "George told me what he could, but I need to hear it from you," Patricia said quietly, sitting down in the chair beside Ryan, her voice carefully controlled, but Ryan could hear the strain beneath it, the fear and the anger that mirrored his own. Ryan told her everything, keeping his voice low so as not to wake Emily, describing the scene he'd walked into at Jessica's apartment, the empty bottles and the party debris, Jessica passed out on the couch, the locked bedroom door with its cruel metal latch, the 2 girls huddled on the floor, Emma sick and feverish and dehydrated after 3 days of imprisonment. Patricia's face grew harder with each detail, her jaw setting in that way Ryan recognized from the countless times she'd fought for Catherine during her illness, that fierce protective instinct that wouldn't bend or break for anyone. "That woman," Patricia said, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage, "that woman locked 2 children in a room for 3 days while she partied. She could have killed them, Ryan. She could have killed Emma." "I know," Ryan said, the words coming out hoarse and broken. "I know, and I will never forgive myself for not seeing this coming, for not listening when Emily tried to tell me something was wrong." Patricia's expression softened slightly and she reached over to grip Ryan's hand. "This is not your fault. You trusted someone you thought you could trust. The fault lies entirely with Jessica." Before Ryan could respond, a doctor in navy blue scrubs approached them, a woman in her mid-40s with kind brown eyes and an expression that was professional but compassionate. "Mr. Mitchell?" she asked, and Ryan stood up immediately, careful not to jostle Emily too much though his daughter stirred and blinked awake, sensing the importance of the moment. I'm Dr. Sarah Chin, the attending physician in the pediatric emergency department. I've been treating Emma. Ryan's heart hammered so hard he could barely hear his own voice. How is she? Is she going to be okay? Dr. Chin gestured for them to sit back down and pulled up a chair facing them, her body language suggesting this would be more than a quick update. Emma is stable now, which is the most important thing. We've got her on 4 fluids and antibiotics and we're monitoring her closely. However, I need to be honest with you about what we found. Ryan felt Patricia's hand tighten on his as Dr. Chin continued. Emma was severely dehydrated when she arrived, and she's suffering from acute gastroenteritis, which is inflammation of the stomach and intestines. Based on her symptoms and what we found in her blood work, we believe she contracted this from contaminated food, possibly something she ate several days ago that her body has been trying to fight off. The dehydration made everything worse, much worse. If you had brought her in even 6 hours later, we would be looking at potential kidney damage or worse. The doctor paused, her expression growing more serious. But there's something else, Mr. Mitchell. During our examination we found evidence of prolonged neglect. Emma has lost approximately 8 pounds since her last recorded doctor's visit 3 months ago, which is significant for a child her size. She has bruises on her arms and legs in various stages of healing, suggesting multiple incidents over time. Her teeth show signs of poor nutrition and lack of proper dental care. And when we spoke to her, once she was conscious enough to communicate, she told us some very concerning things about her home environment. Ryan felt the world tilt beneath him. What kind of things? Dr. Chin glanced at Emily, seeming to weigh how much to say in front of the child, but Emily spoke up before the doctor could decide. Emma told me stuff too, Dad. Before this weekend. She said Jessica doesn't feed her sometimes when she's bad. She said Jessica locks her in the closet when she has friends over because Emma embarrasses her. She said there are lots of games like the invisible children game. The words hung in the air like poison, each syllable adding weight to the suffocating realization that Ryan had been completely blind to what was happening to Emma under Jessica's care. Patricia made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob, her hand flying to her mouth. Ryan sat frozen, his mind rejecting and accepting the information simultaneously, part of him wanting to deny that this could be true, that he could have married someone capable of such cruelty, while another part of him recognized that every strange behavior he dismissed, every time Emily hadn't wanted to go to Jessica's apartment, every vague excuse Jessica had made about Emma being shy or difficult, had been warning signs he'd ignored. Dr. Chin, Ryan managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper, what happens now? The doctor's expression was grave. I've already contacted Child Protective Services as I'm mandated to do when we see evidence of abuse or neglect. They'll be sending a caseworker here within the hour to interview Emma, to interview you and Emily as well, and to make a determination about Emma's safety. I've also contacted the police because what you've described, locking children in a room without adequate food, water, or supervision for 3 days, constitutes criminal child endangerment at minimum. Ryan nodded, numb but knowing this was necessary, knowing that Jessica had to face consequences for what she'd done. Can I see Emma now? Yes, we've moved her to a room in the pediatric ward. She's awake and asking for you. Dr. Chin stood up and gestured for them to follow. But Mr. Mitchell, I need to prepare you for what you're going to see. Emma is physically recovering, but she's very frightened. She keeps asking if she did something wrong, if she's in trouble for not being invisible enough. She's been conditioned to believe that her needs and her very existence are burdens, that she deserves to be hidden away. That kind of psychological damage takes time to heal, often longer than the physical wounds. They followed Dr. Chin through the maze of hospital corridors, Patricia walking on one side of Ryan and Emily on the other, a small protective unit moving through the fluorescent-lit passages that smelled of antiseptic and illness. Ryan tried to prepare himself for seeing Emma, tried to construct the right words to say to her, but everything felt inadequate, everything felt like too little too late. Emma's room was on the 4th floor in the pediatric wing where the walls were painted in cheerful colors and decorated with cartoon characters that seemed grotesquely out of place given the circumstances. Dr. Chin pushed open the door to room 417 and stepped aside to let Ryan enter first. Emma lay in the hospital bed, looking impossibly small against the white sheets, her dark hair spread across the pillow and her brown eyes huge in her pale face. An 4-line ran into her arm, secured with bright pink tape that someone had tried to make look friendly and fun. Various monitors beeped softly around her, tracking her heart rate and oxygen levels. When Emma saw Ryan, her face crumpled and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice small and broken. "I'm sorry I got sick. I'm sorry I wasn't invisible enough. I tried so hard to be quiet but my tummy hurt so much and I threw up and I couldn't help it and I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Ryan crossed the room in 3 strides and gathered Emma into his arms as carefully as he could manage while avoiding the medical equipment, holding this little girl who should have been his responsibility to protect, who should have been safe in his home, who instead had been subjected to unimaginable cruelty by the woman he'd married. "Emma, sweetheart, listen to me very carefully," Ryan said, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't control anymore. "You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. You didn't do anything wrong. You being sick is not your fault. You needing food and water and care is not your fault. You are not invisible and you should never have been made to feel like you needed to be. Do you understand me?" Emma shook her head against his chest. "But Mama said I was too much. She said I was too loud and too needy and that's why my daddy left. She said if I could just learn to be invisible sometimes, to not bother people with my problems, then maybe people would want me around." The words shattered something fundamental in Ryan's chest, broke apart his last remaining illusions about Jessica, destroyed any possibility of reconciliation or explanation that could make this acceptable. He pulled back slightly to look Emma in the eyes, using his thumbs to gently wipe away her tears. "Emma, your mother was wrong. So completely, utterly wrong. You are not too much. You are exactly enough. You are a beautiful, wonderful little girl who deserves to be seen and heard and cared for every single day. The fact that your father left was his failure, not yours, and your mother's behavior is her failure, not yours. None of this is your fault." Emily had climbed onto the other side of Emma's bed and wrapped her arms around her from behind, creating a protective circle around the younger girl. "Emma, you're my sister," Emily said fiercely. "Real sisters, not just stepsisters. And sisters don't have to be invisible. Sisters get to be loud and messy and sick and annoying sometimes and they still get loved. That's how it works." Patricia stood at the foot of the bed, tears streaming down her face as she watched the 3 children, because that's what they were despite Emily's brave words and mature understanding, 3 children who should never have had to face any of this. "Emma, sweetheart," Patricia said gently, "you're going to come home with us. You're going to be safe and you're going to be fed, and you're going to be loved exactly as you are. No more games. No more hiding. I promise you." A knock on the door interrupted the moment, and Dr. Chin poked her head in. "Mr. Mitchell, the CPS caseworker is here, along with 2 police officers. They need to speak with you and the children." Ryan nodded and reluctantly released Emma, though Emily stayed curled beside her on the bed. "Will you stay with her?" Ryan asked his daughter. "I'm not leaving her," Emily replied with such certainty that Ryan felt a surge of pride despite everything else. He stepped out into the hallway where 2 police officers, 1 male and 1 female, stood with a tired-looking woman in her 50s carrying a worn briefcase. The woman extended her hand. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Denise Wright from Child Protective Services. I need to ask you some questions about Emma's living situation and what led to her hospitalization today." For the next 45 minutes, Ryan recounted everything again in excruciating detail, answering questions from both Denise Wright and the police officers, who introduced themselves as Officers Martinez and Kowalski. He showed them photos on his phone of the apartment as he'd found it, the locked bedroom door, the bucket of vomit, the minimal food and water that had been left for the children. Officer Martinez took notes while Officer Kowalski's expression grew darker with each detail. "Mr. Mitchell, we're going to need to go to that apartment and document the scene," Officer Kowalski said. "We'll also need to speak with Jessica. Based on what you've told us and what the doctors have reported, we'll be arresting her on charges of child endangerment, child abuse, and child neglect. Given the severity and duration of the incident, these are felony charges." Ryan nodded, feeling a grim satisfaction that Jessica would face consequences but also a deep, aching sadness that it had come to this, that he'd brought this woman into their lives, that his quest to create a happy blended family had resulted in such harm to an innocent child. Denise Wright closed her notebook and looked at Ryan with an expression that was professional but not unkind. "Mr. Mitchell, Emma cannot return to her mother's custody. Legally, as her stepfather, you don't have automatic rights to her. But given the circumstances and Emma's clear attachment to you and your daughter, I'm going to recommend to the judge that Emma be placed in your temporary emergency custody while we work through the legal process. This will require a court hearing likely within the next 72 hours, but for now, once Emma is medically cleared to leave the hospital, she can go home with you." "Yes," Ryan said immediately. "Yes, absolutely. Emma belongs with us." Denise Wright's expression softened slightly. I'll need to conduct a home study of your residence, interview you more extensively, and there will be ongoing monitoring, but I can see that Emma is loved here. That counts for a great deal. After the caseworker and police officers left, Ryan returned to Emma's room to find that a nurse had brought lunch trays for the girls. Emily was trying to coax Emma into eating some applesauce while Patricia sat in the visitor's chair, watching over them like a guardian angel. Emma managed a few spoonfuls before her eyes started to droop with exhaustion, the combination of medication and emotional overwhelm finally pulling her towards sleep. Ryan sat in the chair beside Patricia while the girls dozed, Emily still curled protectively around Emma on the hospital bed. They sat in silence for a long time before Patricia spoke. What are you going to do about Jessica? Ryan's jaw clenched. I'm going to make sure she never hurts another child again. I'm going to testify against her, cooperate fully with the prosecution, and file for divorce and sole custody of Emily immediately. And I'm going to adopt Emma if her biological father doesn't resurface and if the courts will allow it. She's not going into the foster system. She's staying with us where she belongs. Patricia reached over and squeezed Ryan's hand. Catherine would be proud of you, you know. For doing the right thing now, even though it's hard. Catherine would be horrified that I let this happen in the first place, Ryan said bitterly. She trusted me to protect Emily, and instead I brought danger right into our lives. You made a mistake, Patricia said firmly. You trusted someone who turned out to be unworthy of that trust. But you're fixing it now. You're protecting these children now. That's what matters. Ryan wanted to believe her, wanted to forgive himself, but the guilt sat heavy in his chest like a stone. His phone buzzed in his pocket and he pulled it out to see a text message from an unknown number. The message was short but shocking in its audacity. How dare you call the police on me? You had no right to interfere with how I parent my daughter. When I get out of this police station, we're going to have a serious talk about boundaries. Ryan stared at the message in disbelief, the sheer narcissism and lack of self-awareness it displayed, the complete absence of remorse or acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Jessica had been arrested, presumably had been questioned about locking 2 children in a room for 3 days, about neglecting Emma to the point of hospitalization, and her response was anger at Ryan for interfering. He showed the message to Patricia, who read it and made a sound of disgust. Save that message, Patricia said. Forward it to your lawyer and to the police. Let them see that she still doesn't understand what she did wrong. Ryan did exactly that, forwarding the message to Officer Kowalski and then blocking Jessica's number. He didn't want to hear from her, didn't want her excuses or her rage or her manipulations. All he wanted was to keep Emma and Emily safe, to give them the stable, loving home they deserved, to help them heal from the trauma they'd endured. As the afternoon wore on, a social worker from the hospital came by to speak with Emma, conducting a gentle interview about her home life with Jessica while Ryan and Patricia waited outside the room. When the social worker emerged, her face was grim. That little girl has been living in survival mode for months, possibly longer, she told Ryan quietly. The neglect wasn't just this one incident. This was a pattern. Jessica would lock Emma in closets when she had company over, would withhold food as punishment for minor infractions, would tell Emma that she was a burden and that she wished she'd never had her. Emma learned to make herself small, to minimize her needs, to try to be invisible because visibility meant punishment. Ryan felt physically ill listening to this, understanding now all the times Emma had been quiet during family dinners, had asked for seconds but then immediately retracted the request, had apologized for normal childish behavior like spilling a drink or laughing too loudly. He'd thought she was just shy or nervous about the new family dynamic. Instead, she'd been terrified, conditioned by months of abuse to believe she didn't deserve basic care and consideration. That evening, after Emily had been picked up by Patricia to go get some rest at her grandmother's house, Ryan sat alone with Emma as she ate a real dinner for the first time in days. She picked at the macaroni and cheese on her tray, eating slowly and carefully as though afraid the food might be taken away from her. Emma, Ryan said gently, I need to tell you something important. The people from Child Protective Services, they've said you can come live with me and Emily permanently, if that's something you want. You don't have to go back to your mother's apartment. You don't have to see her if you don't want to. You're going to be safe. Emma's fork clattered against her plate and her eyes went wide with something that looked like hope mixed with disbelief. Really? I can stay with you? Forever? As long as you want to be there, Ryan confirmed. I know I'm not your biological father, but if you'll let me, I'd like to be your dad. A real dad, the kind who takes care of you and keeps you safe and never, ever makes you feel like you need to be invisible. Tears welled up in Emma's eyes, but for the first time since Ryan had found her, They seemed like tears of relief rather than fear or pain. "I want that," she whispered. "I want a dad who doesn't leave. I want a family who wants me." Ryan moved to sit on the edge of her hospital bed, carefully gathering her into a hug. "You have that now. You have Emily, who already loves you like a real sister. You have Patricia, who's already claimed you as her granddaughter. And you have me. We're your family now, Emma. And family doesn't give up on each other." Emma clung to him, her small hands gripping his shirt as though afraid he might disappear if she let go. They stayed like that for a long time while the monitors beeped softly in the background and the hospital bustled with activity beyond their small room. Later that night, after Emma had finally fallen into a deep, healing sleep, Ryan stepped out into the hallway to take a phone call from his lawyer, Marcus Henderson, who he'd contacted earlier in the day to begin divorce and custody proceedings. "Ryan, I've been looking into the situation with Emma," Marcus said without preamble. "The good news is that Emma's biological father signed away his parental rights 3 years ago when he abandoned Jessica. He wanted nothing to do with child support or custody. That means Jessica has been Emma's sole legal guardian, but it also means that if Jessica's parental rights are terminated due to the abuse and neglect charges, Emma would ordinarily go into the foster system since you have no legal relationship to her." Ryan's heart sank. "Marcus, she can't go into foster care. She's been through enough." "Let me finish," Marcus said. "There's a legal mechanism called kinship foster care, where a child can be placed with a family member or someone with a significant relationship to the child while the legal process works itself out. Given that you're married to Emma's mother, even though you're in the process of divorcing, and given that Emma has been part of your household and has a significant relationship with you and Emily, you could qualify for kinship foster care placement. It's not adoption yet, but it would keep Emma with you while we work through the legal channels to make it permanent." Relief washed over Ryan so powerfully he had to lean against the wall for support. "What do we need to do?" "I'm already drafting the paperwork. I'll have it filed with the family court first thing Monday morning. In the meantime, the emergency placement CPS has granted you will keep Emma with you over the weekend. But Ryan, I need to warn you, Jessica could fight this. She could claim that you're trying to steal her daughter, that this is retaliation for her asking for a divorce, any number of things. The fact that she's been arrested helps our case enormously, but we need to be prepared for a legal battle." "Let her fight," Ryan said grimly. "I have documentation of what she did. I have medical reports. I have the testimony of 2 children who lived through her neglect. If Jessica wants a legal battle, she'll get one and she'll lose." After hanging up with Marcus, Ryan stood in the quiet hospital corridor and looked through the window into Emma's room where the little girl slept peacefully, no longer huddled in pain on a cold floor, no longer trapped and invisible. Whatever legal battles lay ahead, whatever complications arose from this nightmare, Ryan knew one thing with absolute certainty. Emma was his daughter now in every way that mattered, and he would move heaven and earth to keep her safe, to give her the childhood she deserved, to help her understand that she was worthy of love and care and visibility. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with court dates and therapy sessions and difficult conversations, but they would face it together as a family, and they would come out stronger on the other side. 6 months had passed since that horrible Friday morning when Ryan had walked into Jessica's apartment and discovered Emma sick and abandoned, and as he sat in the family courtroom waiting for the final custody hearing that would determine Emma's future permanently, he reflected on how much had changed in those half a year of transformation and revelation. Emma had been discharged from the hospital after 4 days of treatment and had come home to Ryan's townhouse in Brooklyn Heights, moving into the bedroom next to Emily's that Ryan had hastily converted from his home office into a proper child's room, painting the walls a soft lavender that Emma had chosen and filling it with books and toys and all the things a 6-year-old girl should have. The first few weeks had been challenging in ways Ryan hadn't anticipated, not because Emma was difficult but because she was too easy, too compliant, too eager to please and too quick to apologize for normal childhood behavior. She would ask permission before getting a glass of water from the kitchen, would refuse second helpings at dinner even when clearly still hungry, would clean her room obsessively and panic if a toy was left out of place. All behaviors ingrained by months of Jessica's psychological abuse that taught Emma her needs were burdens and her presence was something to be hidden. Patricia had moved in temporarily to help with the transition, and together they had worked with a child psychologist named Dr. Rachel Morrison who specialized in trauma recovery, taking Emma to twice-weekly therapy sessions where she slowly began to unpack the damage Jessica had inflicted and learn that she was safe now, that she was wanted, that she didn't have to earn love through perfect behavior. Emily had been Emma's greatest ally in this healing process, treating her not as a fragile victim who needed to be handled carefully but as a real sister who could be annoying and fun and messy and loved unconditionally, teaching Emma through example that childhood was supposed to include laughter and mistakes and taking up space in the world. Ryan had filed for divorce from Jessica within a week of her arrest, and the legal proceedings had been brutal and revealing in ways that still made him feel sick when he thought about them too deeply. Jessica had initially been released on bail and had immediately launched a campaign to paint herself as the victim, calling Ryan's friends and family members to claim he had fabricated the entire incident because he wanted to steal her daughter, posting carefully crafted messages on social media about how she was fighting for her child against a vindictive stepfather who couldn't accept her independence. But the evidence against her had been overwhelming and irrefutable, from the medical reports documenting Emma's condition when she arrived at the hospital to the photographs Ryan had taken of the apartment showing the locked bedroom door and the deplorable conditions to Emily's testimony about the 3 days trapped in that room to Emma's own accounts given to Child Protective Services and the police. The criminal trial had taken place just 2 months after Jessica's arrest, fast-tracked because of the severity of the charges and the clear evidence of the crime. Ryan had sat in the courtroom and watched as prosecutors presented their case, calling Dr. Chin to testify about Emma's physical condition and the signs of long-term neglect, calling officers Martinez and Kowalski to describe the scene they had documented at Jessica's apartment, calling Denise Wright to share Emma's statements about being locked in closets and having food withheld as punishment. The defense attorney had tried to argue that Jessica was suffering from depression and alcohol addiction, that she had made a terrible mistake during a mental health crisis but didn't deserve to be labeled a child abuser, that she loved her daughter and deserved a chance at rehabilitation. But then the prosecution had called their final witness, and everything had changed in a way no one in that courtroom had expected. A woman named Margaret Torres had taken the stand, a former neighbor of Jessica's from an apartment building in Queens where Jessica had lived 5 years earlier, before she'd met Ryan. Before she'd moved to Soho, Margaret was in her 70s, a retired school teacher with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, and she had come forward after seeing news coverage of Jessica's arrest because she said her conscience wouldn't let her stay silent anymore. Margaret testified that when Emma was just a year old, she had repeatedly witnessed Jessica leaving the baby alone in their apartment for hours at a time, sometimes overnight, while Jessica went out with friends. Margaret had called Child Protective Services multiple times, but Jessica had always managed to charm the caseworkers during their visits, cleaning up the apartment and presenting herself as a struggling single mother doing her best, and the investigations had been closed without action. Margaret described hearing Emma crying for hours through the thin walls, described finding Emma once wandering in the hallway in just a diaper at 2 years old because she'd somehow managed to unlock the apartment door while Jessica was passed out inside. Margaret had eventually moved away, she testified with tears in her eyes, and had always wondered what happened to that little girl, had always felt guilty for not doing more. The revelation that Jessica's neglect and abuse of Emma had been ongoing for years, not just an isolated incident as her defense had claimed, had destroyed any sympathy the jury might have felt. They had deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts: 3 counts of felony child endangerment, 2 counts of child abuse, and 1 count of child neglect. Jessica had been sentenced to 6 years in prison followed by 5 years of supervised probation, and as part of the sentencing, the judge had terminated her parental rights to Emma, stating from the bench that Jessica had proven herself unfit and unwilling to prioritize her child's welfare and that Emma deserved a chance at a real family. Ryan had felt no satisfaction in watching Jessica being led away from the courtroom in handcuffs, only a profound sadness that it had come to this and a bone-deep relief that Emma would never be in her custody again. But the criminal trial had been only one part of the legal maze Ryan had to navigate, because even with Jessica's parental rights terminated, Ryan had no automatic legal claim to Emma as her stepfather, especially now that his marriage to Jessica was being dissolved. That's where Marcus Henderson had proven invaluable, filing petition after petition with family court to establish Ryan's standing to adopt Emma, arguing that Emma had formed a psychological parent-child bond with Ryan and that removing her from his care would constitute additional trauma after everything she'd already endured, presenting evidence of Emma's progress in therapy since coming to live with Ryan and testimony from Dr. Morrison about the importance of stability and continuity for Emma's recovery. The adoption process had been complicated by the fact that Emma's biological father, a man named Christopher Wade who had walked out on Jessica and infant Emma 4 years ago, technically had to be notified of the adoption proceedings even though he'd signed away his parental rights and hadn't had contact with Emma since she was 2 years old. Marcus had hired a private investigator to track down Christopher, who they'd eventually found working at a car dealership in Nevada, living with a new wife and 2 young sons who had no idea he had another child back in New York. When served with the adoption papers, Christopher had to make a choice: contest the adoption and potentially take custody of a daughter he'd abandoned years ago, or consent to the adoption and let Emma stay with the only father figure she really knew. Ryan would never forget the phone call from Marcus telling him that Christopher Wade had signed the consent forms without contest, had actually seemed relieved that someone else was willing to take responsibility for the child he'd never wanted, had said through his lawyer that he hoped Emma would have a better life than he could have given her. It was a cold, pragmatic ending to Christopher's legal connection to Emma, but it cleared the final hurdle for Ryan's adoption petition, which brought them to today, to this courtroom with its wood-paneled walls and American flag in the corner and judge's bench that loomed imposingly at the front of the room. Ryan sat at the petitioner's table with Marcus beside him, while Emma and Emily sat in the gallery behind them with Patricia, all three dressed in their best clothes for this momentous occasion. Emma wore a blue dress with white flowers that Emily had helped her pick out, and her hair was pulled back with a matching headband. She looked healthy now, having gained back the weight she'd lost under Jessica's care, her cheeks full and rosy, her eyes bright with an emotion Ryan desperately hoped was happiness and not fear. The bailiff called the courtroom to order and announced the case. In the matter of the petition of Ryan Mitchell to adopt Emma Christine Wade, case number FL 2025-7834. Judge Catherine Morrison, no relation to Emma's therapist despite the shared last name, entered from her chambers and took her seat, looking down at the thick file of paperwork before her with an unreadable expression. Judge Morrison was known as a fair but exacting jurist who took children's welfare seriously and didn't suffer fools or half measures when it came to family law. Mr. Henderson, Judge Morrison said looking at Marcus, this is an unusual case. Your client is petitioning to adopt the daughter of his soon-to-be ex-wife, a woman who is currently serving a prison sentence for abusing and neglecting this same child. Walk me through why the court should grant this petition rather than placing the child in the foster system where she might be adopted by a family without such complicated connections to her traumatic past. Marcus stood, buttoning his suit jacket in a gesture Ryan recognized as his preparation for a fight. Your Honor, if I may, I'd like to call Ryan Mitchell to the stand to explain in his own words why he's petitioning for this adoption and what Emma means to his family. Judge Morrison nodded, and Ryan rose on shaking legs, walked to the witness stand, was sworn in by the bailiff, and sat down feeling more nervous than he'd ever felt closing a multimillion-dollar business deal. Marcus approached with a gentle expression that put Ryan slightly at ease. Mr. Mitchell, please tell the court how you first met Emma. Ryan took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice steady despite his nerves. I met Emma about 2 years ago when I started dating her mother, Jessica. Emma was 4 years old then, very quiet and shy. At first, I thought she was just reserved around strangers, but as I got to know her, I realized she was afraid, not shy. She was afraid of making mistakes, afraid of being too loud, afraid of asking for things she needed. I didn't understand the full extent of what Jessica had been doing to her at that time, but I saw a little girl who desperately needed someone to show her that she mattered. Marcus nodded. And how did your relationship with Emma develop? Slowly, Ryan admitted. She didn't trust easily and I didn't push. But I made sure that whenever she was at my house, she knew she was welcome, that she could be a kid. I let her make messes in the kitchen when we baked cookies. I read her bedtime stories even when she insisted she didn't need them. I showed up for her the way her mother and her biological father never had. And somewhere along the way, she stopped being my girlfriend's daughter or my stepdaughter and just became my daughter in my heart. Marcus pulled up a document on his tablet and displayed it on the courtroom screen. Your Honor, this is a letter written by Emma's therapist, Dr. Rachel Morrison, regarding Emma's attachment to Mr. Mitchell. Dr. Morrison writes, and I quote, Emma Wade has formed a secure attachment to Ryan Mitchell that is consistent with a healthy parent-child bond. Mr. Mitchell provides Emma with the stability, consistency, and unconditional positive regard that she desperately needs to heal from her trauma. Removing Emma from Mr. Mitchell's care would be psychologically devastating and would likely undo months of progress in her recovery. In my professional opinion, Ryan Mitchell is Emma's psychological father, and that relationship should be legally recognized and protected through adoption. Judge Morrison studied the letter on her screen, then looked at Ryan. Mr. Mitchell, I need to ask you something directly. Emma will always carry the trauma of what her mother did to her. She may have behavioral issues as she grows older, may struggle with trust and attachment, may require ongoing therapy for years. Adopting her isn't like adopting a baby with a clean slate. You're taking on a child with significant emotional needs. Are you prepared for that reality? Ryan met the judge's gaze without flinching. Your Honor, I love Emma. Not in spite of her trauma but including all of it, because her trauma is part of her story and her story is what makes her who she is. Am I prepared for the challenges ahead? Honestly, I don't know. I've never parented a child through trauma recovery before. But I'm committed to learning, to showing up every single day, to getting her whatever help she needs, to being patient on the hard days and celebrating the good ones. Emma deserves a father who chooses her every single day, and I want to be that father legally and permanently, not just emotionally. Something shifted in Judge Morrison's expression, a slight softening around her eyes. And what does your biological daughter, Emily, think about this adoption? Emily wants it as much as I do, Ryan said, and the words came from his heart. Emma isn't a burden to our family, Your Honor. She's a blessing. She's Emily's sister, Patricia's granddaughter, and my daughter. She's already part of us. This adoption would just make legal what's already true in our hearts. Marcus smiled slightly and turned to the judge. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to call Emily Mitchell to the stand as well. Judge Morrison raised an eyebrow. She's 9 years old, correct? Yes, Your Honor, but I believe her testimony is relevant to understanding the family dynamic and Emma's integration into the Mitchell household. Very well, but keep it brief. Emily walked to the witness stand with a confidence that made Ryan's heart swell with pride, took the oath seriously, and sat down looking small in the large witness chair but not intimidated. Marcus approached her with a warm smile. Emily, can you tell the judge about Emma? Emma is my sister, Emily said simply. Not my stepsister or my foster sister, just my sister. She's annoying sometimes because she borrows my clothes without asking, and she's better at math than me, which is frustrating, but she also makes me laugh, and she's really good at board games, and she gives the best hugs. She's my sister, and I don't want her to go anywhere else. Marcus nodded. Were you scared when your dad said he wanted to adopt Emma? Did you worry that he might love you less or pay less attention to you? Emily shook her head firmly. No, because love doesn't work like that. My mom taught me that before she died. She said love isn't a pie where everyone gets smaller pieces if more people come to the table. Love is more like a fire that gets bigger and warmer when you add more people to it. Dad loves me and Emma, and loving Emma doesn't mean he loves me less. It just means our family has more love in it. Judge Morrison leaned forward slightly, studying Emily with what looked like approval. That's very wise, Emily. Did your mother really tell you that? Yes, ma'am, Emily said. She knew she was dying, so she made sure to teach me important things before she left. That was one of them. The courtroom was silent for a moment, the weight of a dying mother's wisdom hanging in the air. Then Marcus said, Thank you, Emily. No further questions, Your Honor. Judge Morrison dismissed Emily, who walked back to sit between Patricia and Emma, taking Emma's hand in hers in a gesture of solidarity. The judge looked down at her paperwork again, then back at Ryan, who had returned to the petitioner's table. Mr. Henderson, does the state have any objection to this adoption petition? The assistant district attorney assigned to the case, a young woman named Jennifer Park, stood up. No objection, Your Honor. The state believes this adoption is in Emma's best interest given her established relationship with the petitioner and the successful placement over the past 6 months. Judge Morrison nodded slowly, and Ryan held his breath, feeling like everything in his world was balanced on the edge of whatever this judge was about to say. Mr. Mitchell, Judge Morrison said, I've reviewed all the materials in this case, including the psychological evaluations, the home study reports, Dr. Morrison's letters, the testimony from Emma's teachers about her progress in school, and the criminal case file regarding Jessica Wade's conviction. I've also read Emma's own letter to me, written with the help of her therapist, in which she expresses her desire to be adopted by you and to officially become a Mitchell. Ryan hadn't known Emma had written a letter, and the fact that she'd put her wishes in writing to a judge, made his eyes sting with tears he didn't try to hide. Judge Morrison continued, This is indeed an unusual case, but unusual doesn't mean wrong. The law recognizes that family is not just about biology but about the relationships we build and the commitments we make to each other. Emma Wade has suffered tremendously at the hands of the woman who gave birth to her, but she has found safety and love in your home, Mr. Mitchell. The evidence before me overwhelmingly supports the conclusion that you are Emma's psychological parent and that this adoption serves her best interest. Therefore, I am granting your petition. Ryan's breath left his body in a rush, and he heard Patricia gasp behind him while Emily let out a small cheer that she quickly tried to suppress. Judge Morrison smiled slightly at the reaction and held up her hand for quiet. However, the judge continued, and Ryan's heart stuttered with fear that there was some condition or complication he hadn't anticipated. Before I finalize this adoption, I'd like to speak with Emma directly. Bailiff, please bring Emma Wade to the bench. The bailiff gestured for Emma, who looked terrified as she stood up and walked toward the front of the courtroom, her small hands clasped together in front of her. Judge Morrison came down from her elevated bench and knelt down so she was at Emma's eye level, a gesture that surprised everyone in the courtroom. "Hello, Emma," Judge Morrison said gently. "I'm Judge Morrison, but you can call me Judge Katie if that's easier. I've read your letter and I want to make sure I understand what you want. Can you tell me in your own words why you want Ryan to adopt you?" Emma's voice was quiet but clear. "Because he's my daddy. He takes care of me when I'm sick and reads me stories at night and makes me breakfast in the morning. He doesn't lock me in rooms or tell me I'm too much. He tells me I'm enough just the way I am. And I want his last name so everyone knows I belong to him and to Emily and to Grandma Patricia." Judge Morrison's professional demeanor cracked slightly, and Ryan saw her blink rapidly as though fighting her own tears. "Do you understand that if I sign these adoption papers, Jessica will no longer be your legal mother? That means she won't have any rights to see you or make decisions about you anymore." Emma nodded solemnly. "Dr. Rachel explained it to me. She said it means Jessica can't take me back, even if she gets out of prison. That's what I want. I don't want to be invisible anymore. I want to be Ryan's daughter for real and forever." Judge Morrison stood up and placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. "Then that's exactly what's going to happen, sweetheart. Bailiff, please bring the adoption decree." The bailiff handed a formal document to Judge Morrison, who carried it back to her bench and picked up her pen. "This is the fun part," she said, her voice returning to its official tone but with warmth underneath. "With the power vested in me by the state of New York, I hereby grant the petition for adoption. As of this moment, Emma Christine Wade's legal name is now Emma Christine Mitchell, and Ryan James Mitchell is her legal father with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. Congratulations to the Mitchell family." The courtroom erupted in a way that was probably not typical for family court proceedings, with Patricia openly crying, Emily jumping up and down, and Marcus shaking Ryan's hand while grinning broadly. But Ryan's attention was entirely focused on Emma, who stood frozen in front of the judge's bench looking stunned, as though she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Ryan crossed the courtroom in quick strides and dropped to his knees in front of Emma, gathering her into his arms. "You're my daughter now," he whispered into her hair. "Legally, officially, permanently. Nobody can ever take you away from me. You're mine and I'm yours and we're a family forever." Emma clung to him and started to cry, but they were different tears than the ones Ryan had seen her cry so many times before. These weren't tears of pain or fear or shame. These were tears of relief, of joy, of a little girl who had spent most of her life believing she was unwanted, finally understanding that she was chosen, she was loved, she was home. Emily ran over and threw her arms around both of them, and Patricia joined a moment later, and they stood there in the middle of the courtroom, a family forged not by biology but by choice and love and commitment, holding each other as though they would never let go. Judge Morrison watched them with a soft expression, then cleared her throat. "Mr. Mitchell, I have one more thing for you." She held out an envelope and Ryan stood up to take it, confused about what it could be. He opened it to find a card with a simple message written in Judge Morrison's handwriting. "Sometimes families are born from the hardest circumstances. Treasure what you've built. You've given that little girl her life back." Ryan looked up at the judge with tears streaming down his face and mouthed, "Thank you." Judge Morrison nodded and then banged her gavel lightly. "This court is adjourned. Go celebrate with your family, Mr. Mitchell." They left the courtroom in a daze of happiness, emerging into the bright afternoon sunshine of a perfect spring day. Patricia suggested they all go to Emma's favorite restaurant to celebrate, a little Italian place in Brooklyn that made the best pizza Emma had ever tasted according to the 7-year-old, whose opinion on pizza was now considered expert in the Mitchell household. Over lunch, surrounded by breadsticks and pasta and laughter, Emma kept staring at the official adoption certificate Marcus had given them, running her fingers over her new legal name as though checking to make sure it was real. "Emma Christine Mitchell," she read aloud, testing how it sounded. "That's me. That's really me now." "That's really you," Ryan confirmed, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "And tomorrow we'll go get you a new birth certificate with your new name and everything. And a new social security card," Marcus added, "and we'll update your school records and your medical records. Every official document will say Emma Mitchell from now on." Emma's smile was so bright it could have lit up the entire restaurant. "I've never had a daddy on my birth certificate before. Christopher's name was on the old one, but Dr. Rachel said he was never really my daddy because he left. But now I'll have a real daddy's name on it. Yours." The words hit Ryan with emotional force, and he had to look away for a moment to compose himself. When he looked back, Emily was showing Emma something on her phone, a social media post Emily had created announcing her sister's adoption with a photo of them together. "I'm telling everyone," Emily declared. "Everyone needs to know that Emma Mitchell is officially my sister now." Patricia raised her glass of water in a toast. "To Emma Mitchell, the newest member of our family officially but who has been part of our hearts for a long time. May you always know how loved you are." They clinked their glasses together, water and soda and iced tea, celebrating a victory that had cost so much pain but had led them to this moment of pure, uncomplicated joy. The dinner stretched long as they talked and laughed and made plans for the future, discussing the summer vacation they would take as a family, the room redecoration Emma wanted to do now that the space was permanently hers, the dance classes Emma wanted to try and the soccer league Emily was joining. That night, after they'd returned home and the celebration had wound down, Ryan followed his nightly routine of tucking both girls into bed. He started with Emily, who hugged him extra tight and whispered, "Thank you for adopting Emma, Dad. I know you did it for her, but you also did it for me because I needed a sister who would stay forever." "You're welcome, sweetheart," Ryan replied, kissing her forehead. "I love you so much." "I love you too, Dad. Tell Emma good night from me." Ryan crossed the hall to Emma's room, where she was already under the covers but clearly not ready to sleep, her eyes wide and alert in the soft glow of her nightlight. He sat down on the edge of her bed and brushed her hair back from her face. "Big day," he said simply. Emma nodded. "The biggest day. Daddy, can I ask you something?" "Anything, sweetheart." "Do you think my old life ever really happened? Sometimes it feels like a bad dream, like maybe Jessica and the locked rooms and being invisible was all just something I imagined." Ryan's heart ached at the question, at the desire he heard behind it for Emma's trauma to not be real. "It happened, Emma. It was real and it was terrible and I'm so sorry it happened to you. But that chapter of your life is over now. You have a new story starting, one where you're safe and loved and visible every single day." Emma considered this, then nodded slowly. "Dr. Rachel says that what happened to me wasn't my fault but that it's part of my story, and my story is what makes me strong. She says I survived something really hard and that means I can survive other hard things too." "Dr. Rachel is very smart," Ryan agreed. "You are strong, Emma, stronger than you know. And you never have to be that strong alone again because you have a whole family standing with you now." Emma reached out and took Ryan's hand, her small fingers wrapping around his larger ones. "I used to wish I had a different life, a different mom, a different everything. But if I had a different life, I wouldn't have ended up here with you and Emily and Grandma Patricia. So maybe the bad stuff happened so that the good stuff could happen too." It was a profound observation from a 7-year-old, the kind of wisdom that comes only from surviving darkness and finding light on the other side. Ryan didn't know if he believed that Emma's suffering had been somehow necessary to bring her to their family, didn't want to think that a just universe would require a child to endure abuse in order to eventually find love, but he understood what Emma was trying to say, that she had found meaning in her pain, had found a way to make sense of her story by seeing where it led her. "I'm just glad you're here," Ryan said simply. "However we got here, whatever path we took, I'm grateful every single day that you're my daughter." Emma smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that showed missing front teeth and pure happiness. "I'm grateful too, Daddy. Can we read a story before I go to sleep?" Ryan picked up the book from Emma's nightstand, a fairy tale about a princess who saves herself without waiting for a prince to rescue her, and began to read while Emma snuggled deeper into her blankets, safe and warm and home. By the time he finished the story, Emma's eyes had closed and her breathing had evened out into the deep rhythm of sleep. Ryan sat there for a few minutes longer, just watching his daughter sleep, marveling at how much had changed in 6 months, how a morning that had started with horror and desperation had led to this moment of peace and security. He thought about Jessica, sitting in a prison cell somewhere, having lost everything because of her cruelty and neglect. He didn't hate her, he realized. He pitied her, pitied that she'd had a beautiful daughter who adored her and she'd thrown that gift away, pitied that she'd never understood how lucky she was to be Emma's mother. But mostly he felt grateful that Jessica's failure had given him the chance to be Emma's father, to give this remarkable little girl the life she deserved. Ryan stood up quietly and walked to the door, pausing to look back at Emma one more time. "Good night, Emma Mitchell," he whispered. "My daughter. My brave, beautiful, wonderful daughter." He closed the door softly and walked downstairs to where Patricia was waiting in the living room with 2 cups of tea. She handed him one and patted the couch beside her. "How are you holding up?" Patricia asked. "Today was a big day for you too." Ryan sighed and leaned back against the cushions. "I keep thinking about everything that had to go wrong for things to go right. If I hadn't come home early from Singapore that day, if I hadn't found them when I did, Emma might have died in that room. And even if she'd survived, she'd probably be in the foster system right now instead of upstairs sleeping in her own bed in our house." Patricia nodded thoughtfully. "But you did come home early. You did find them. You did fight for her. That's what matters, Ryan. Not the what-ifs, but what actually happened. You saved that little girl's life and then you gave her a family. That's extraordinary." "I just did what anyone would do," Ryan protested, but Patricia shook her head firmly. "No, not anyone. Plenty of people would have called the authorities and walked away, would have left Emma to the system and moved on with their lives. You chose to fight for a child who wasn't biologically yours, who came with trauma and complications and legal battles. You chose her, Ryan. That's what makes you extraordinary." They sat in comfortable silence, sipping their tea and processing the momentous day. Eventually, Patricia stood up and kissed Ryan's forehead the way she used to kiss Catherine's. "Your wife would be so proud of you," she said softly. "Catherine always said you had the biggest heart of anyone she knew." She was right. After Patricia went up to bed in the guest room she'd been occupying since Emma came to live with them, Ryan walked through the quiet house, checking locks and turning off lights, doing the mundane tasks of closing down the household for the night. But as he moved through each room, he saw evidence of Emma everywhere. Her backpack by the front door next to Emily's, her jacket on the hook, her shoes kicked off under the bench, her artwork held to the refrigerator with magnets, her favorite cereal in the pantry. These small markers of her presence, of her belonging, filled Ryan with a contentment he hadn't felt since Catherine died. His family was whole again, not in the same way it had been before, but in a new way that was just as real and just as precious. Before going to bed himself, Ryan did one final check on the girls and found Emily had snuck into Emma's room and was curled up in bed beside her sister, the two of them sleeping tangled together the way they often did on nights when Emily sensed Emma might have nightmares. Ryan smiled and pulled the blanket up over both of them, then stood in the doorway watching his daughters sleep, these two remarkable girls who had chosen each other as sisters just as fiercely as he had chosen them as daughters. In that moment, standing in a doorway watching over sleeping children, Ryan understood something fundamental about family and love and healing. That the worst moments of our lives can sometimes lead us to the best parts of ourselves, that broken things can be mended into something even stronger than they were before, and that choosing to love someone, choosing to show up for them every single day regardless of how hard it gets, is the most important choice we ever make. Emma had been invisible for too long, hidden away by someone who should have celebrated her existence. But now she was seen, she was known, she was loved, and she would never be invisible again. Ryan closed the door quietly and walked to his own bedroom, climbing into bed with a full heart and a peaceful mind, knowing that tomorrow he would wake up and do it all again. Make breakfast for his daughters, drive them to school, help with homework, mediate sister arguments, give goodnight hugs, and fall into bed exhausted but happy. This was his life now, this beautiful, complicated, messy, wonderful life built from the ashes of tragedy and trauma. And he wouldn't change a single thing. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to this channel to support our growth and help us share more stories of hope, healing, and the incredible power of choosing love even when it's hard. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your location and thoughts in the comments below. Remember, family isn't always about blood, it's about who shows up, who stays, and who chooses you every single day. Thank you for being part of our community.